I was looking for what I would do or where I would live after London. I always knew when I moved there in 1998, it's not the city that I would retire in, and I would not grow old there. I'm a country bumpkin at heart. The land and the ocean is in my soul. So I was looking for a quieter life. I was looking for a life that gave me a lot of time.
That's Danny McCubbin. Like many of us, Danny had the dream of leaving the hustle and bustle of a big city and leading a simpler life, settling somewhere quieter and closer to nature. After 17 years of living in London, he did just that. He moved to the countryside town of Musamelli in Italy, where he now runs a community kitchen.
Musamelli, it's really in the heart of Sicily. It's 800 feet above sea level. It's surrounded by the most spectacular landscape. So we're 40 minutes from the ocean here. It's a very peaceful town, and it's just picturesque. I was looking to live somewhere where I would have time to start a project, where I could invest, volunteer, give back, and this town has been the perfect place to do that.
But while to many of us urban dwellers, this idea of packing our bags and moving to the countryside sounds appealing, the trend has been quite the opposite. People who live in rural towns are upping sticks and heading for the city. Rural flight has happened throughout history, but in the past half a century, it's sped up dramatically and shows no signs of slowing. By the year 2050, 60% of urban regions in the EU are set to grow in population, whereas 80% of rural regions are predicted to shrink. Look beyond Europe to places like India, China, and the US, and the story's the same. So what's behind this rural exodus? There's no one reason. It's a complex web of technological innovations, local industry decline, and growing globalization. And when people leave, gaps start to emerge in things like food security, healthcare, education, and infrastructure starts to fall apart. The trend isn't great for our already overcrowded cities either. So how can rural towns and villages recover, improve quality of life, and maybe even attract new residents? On this episode of Common Ground, we're heading to Italy, Portugal, and the US to meet some of the people leaving metropolises behind, heading for the open road and making their mark when it comes to reviving rural communities. Stay with us. This is a podcast by Toposophy. For more than a decade, Toposophy has been inspiring and informing its clients on how to transform places, whether they're neighbourhoods, cities, regions, or whole countries. The Toposophy team works with international organisations, multinational brands, and government agencies around the world, leading them every step of the way to find placemaking and marketing solutions that are built to last. As constantly curious people, the team loves to collect game-changing ideas that are transforming other sectors and draw valuable lessons for the future of places. This podcast series, curated by the Toposophy team, is just one example of how these valuable ideas are brought to life.
Buongiorno.
Hey. Hi. Nice to meet you. This is Salvatore. He works, volunteers for us every Sunday here in the kitchen. Si.
First up, we're on the ground in Musameli to find out what drew Danny to this quaint Sicilian town in the first place.
Yeah, what I know is about 250 people brought a house in Musameli.
That's Franco, an old-time resident of Musameli.
Most 95% they were foreigners, Americans and from Brazil, from all over the world really. Belgium, Germany, England. Okay, Danny done a good job. When Danny opened this good kitchen, everyone
Here's the deal.
was crazy.
It wasn't just the fresh air and bucolic landscape that drew Danny here. It was a bargain. He found a spacious 2-story stone farmhouse in the town's historic centre for sale at the price of €1. There are hundreds of houses like this up for grabs across Italy, in need of some TLC. Crumbling but beautiful structures, auctioned off for the price of an espresso.
The €1 house project started because many, particularly young people, are leaving these towns. You know, they're leaving these towns because there's no work, so they're going to major cities or they're going to other countries. And then the elderly, the parents of those young people, grow old in their houses, but then when they pass away, they've got no one to leave them to because the kids have left, they've established their lives in other countries, other towns. And so you have these abandoned houses, you know, that aren't being looked after, that are crumbling, that are feeling the effects of the weather. So some really bright Italian said, well, why don't we sell them for €1 to foreigners with the idea that they would come back and repopulate the town and start building community.
That bright Italian was Oliviero Toscano, a famous photographer who was also creative advisor for the then mayor of Salemi, another town in Sicily. Together, they launched the project back in 2008 in an effort to save some near 4,000 residential ruins that lay idle in the town for decades. The €1 scheme almost seems too good to be true, and as with most things, there are some strings attached.
The pros are, obviously, you are getting a house for around €3,000 because that's how much it costs for the notary and the paperwork. You know, where can you buy a house in the world for €3,000? The cons are that most of the good €1 houses have gone. So what you're doing is you're buying it for 3 and then you're probably having to spend 20 to get it renovated.
Offering up property for so little might seem like a bit of a desperate move, but these are desperate times in Italy. The nation is expected to lose 1/5 of its population by 2070, so people aren't just leaving rural towns, they're leaving the country altogether, especially the young. It's a combination of falling birth rates and emigration brought about by the economic crisis, and it's rural areas like Sicily that are suffering the most. The island has lost 200,000 people in just 10 years. That's almost 5% of its population.
People tell me, 20 years ago there were festivals all of the time, like food festivals, street parties, streets being closed off. But that doesn't happen here now. In summer it's busy in the town square, but the streets are deserted. There's 50% youth unemployment in Sicily, and this town's probably even higher.
On the other side of the Atlantic, the US is facing similar challenges.
I grew up in a small town in rural Delaware, which is in the mid-Atlantic region of the US. So I definitely have rural roots and small town roots. And so that's continued to inform my love of rural places and small towns. It's really where my heart is.
That's Stephanie Bertaina. And although today she lives in Washington, D.C., she's dedicated her career to helping towns like the one she grew up in. For over a decade, she's been leading projects for the US government's Community Revitalization Office. The department is all about kickstarting rural economies, helping communities whose traditional industries have left town.
In general, we've seen that so many rural communities are facing this kind of economic transition. Again, the loss of a manufacturing, facility, the decline of natural resources, extraction in a community like coal, for example. As labor practices have changed, rural communities have seen this decline.
Gone are the days of the booming coal mining industry, the days when agriculture employed a good chunk of the population, and when US manufacturing was flourishing. In an age where the technology and service economies are king, job opportunities in rural America are few and far between.
The US was facing severe economic challenges, and our office saw a need, particularly in rural America, to provide assistance to those places that are thinking about what their economic futures are going to be.
One of the ways Stephanie and her office are doing this? Through food.
Williamson, West Virginia. This is one of the communities with whom we got to partner through Local Foods, Local Places. It's a community that's particularly close to my heart. It's in the heart of Appalachia in the US, and so this is a community that has historically been a coal community. And yet, with the decline of the coal industry over the past many, many decades, Williamson was facing huge economic challenges, huge health challenges in the community, and really a sense of hopelessness.
The health challenges Stephanie's talking about are common. Over 180 rural hospitals in the US have closed in the past 17 years, and nearly 90% of places facing food insecurity are in rural counties.
So we got to work with Williamson and to really help them think through how they could continue to be that galvanizing force in the community, from changing that, culture of kind of hopelessness to a culture of health in the community. And local food was a really big part of that, through their downtown farmers market, through their health center, which they located intentionally in a vacant building on Main Street, to community gardens that were situated across the street from a low-income senior housing facility. So people who live in that facility can come across the street and grow their own food, to programs that provide jobs in farming for out-of-work coal miners and veterans who need employment.
Of course, creating jobs is a vital part of reviving a place, whether that's through a culture of local food or the opportunity to play with your local orchestra.
Wishes you all a good show.
I am Martim Sousa Tavares. I am 30 years old. I am an orchestra conductor and founder of Orquestra Sem Fronteiras, which stands for Orchestra with No Borders. Right, so what is Orquestra Sem Fronteiras? It's a cultural and social and geographic enterprise based in Idanha Nova, which is not far from Covilhã, in inland Portugal, right across the border between Portugal and Spain. And it's a region that suffers heavily from demographic desertion, lack of investment, public and private, where opportunities really don't abound. And there are a lot of musicians coming from these places that just drain out of these regions and go to Lisbon, Porto, or live and study abroad.
Funny thing is, these small Portuguese villages actually have great music schools. Thanks to an education reform from the 70s, there are plenty of prestigious conservatories in the countryside. So it's not the talent that's lacking, it's the employment opportunities in these areas afterwards. Enter Martim and his orchestra.
So Orquestra Sem Fronteiras is a platform that's created to grant these young musicians opportunities to play in an orchestra setting, where we pay them, so it's actually a professional job setup. We don't work with a fixed number of musicians, as in a regular orchestra would have their musicians under contract, and they would hold auditions where you fill the positions for first violin, for second violin, etc. We don't do that because we believe in giving as many opportunities as we can. So when we need players, which is every month, we send all conservatories and music schools in inland Portugal and also in some cities of Spain, we send them the roster of musicians that we need. Something like we need 10 violins, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2
But
horns,
giving
1
jobs to
percussion,
musicians is
etc.
just one side of the coin. The orchestra also brings culture to underserved areas. Rather than playing in the opera houses and philharmonicas of capital cities, the concerts take place in the very remote communities where the musicians come from.
We have this initiative that's called Marathons with Pocket Orchestra. And they're marathons because over a weekend we cover 4 to 5 to 6 places. It's usually organized in cooperation with the municipalities. So they choose the villages that need us the most in social, demographic, cultural aspects. And then we intervene. It's a pocket orchestra because they have no theaters. They have no auditoriums. We're usually playing in a church, in a little monastery, anywhere goes. We've had all sorts of setups. I've played with a disco mirror ball on top of my head once. When I tell these people who are filling up the church that the musicians you see before you don't come from Lisbon or Porto, they actually come from the places around here. And some of them, and I ask them to stand or to raise their hands, actually have their grandparents present, and the grandparents will acknowledge that, and people will be very surprised because, oh my God, there's actually a connection between these musicians and this place.
And it's not just the connection between musicians and place. The repertoire itself is also inspired by community traditions. The way Martim sees it, each region has something unique to offer. So instead of just going with the expected, they curate something a little different.
Our New Year's concert is quite different from ordinary New Year's concerts around the world, which are usually imitations from the Vienna New Year's concert, which is filled up with waltzes and polkas and marches from the Strauss dynasty, which is fine if you're in Vienna. That's a pretty legit tradition, but I really see no reason in replicating Viennese tradition outside of Vienna.
Instead, Martim's orchestra set up a concert closer to home, inviting local composers to write contemporary music for traditional Portuguese dances.
They're fast-paced dances that maybe these musicians used to dance when they were kids because they belong to a ranch, or because their grandparents or parents still dance them, or just because they're alive. These are the last places where these dances are alive. So it's kind of a way of linking tradition with contemporary creation and presenting these musicians as kind of the guardians of this tradition, someone who really gets it more than a musician from Lisbon would.
You can talk about all of the aspects that make a good place, making it a walkable, healthy, economically vibrant place that has a mix of activities and opportunities for all. But when it comes down to it, it's really the people that make a place. It's the people that are making things happen. It's the people who are creating the vision for what they want to see in their place. And they're the ones who are going to actually make that vision come to life.
Back in the US, Stephanie wants to start a dialogue. The rural-urban divide isn't just about where opportunities are based, it's also about politics. And within many forgotten rural communities, there's consensus that those at a federal level aren't listening.
What our office provides communities is planning assistance that helps walk a community through a planning process. And it starts out with the community applying to our office, asking for our assistance to say, we want help on this issue. We invite federal agency partners and state agency partners, funding partners, philanthropy, others who can help come to the table and listen to the community's vision as they're developing it. And then through that process, they develop what we call an action plan. And the action plan is really the community's next steps for what they want to achieve in the next 6 months or a year or 2 years.
It's an approach based on transparency, where communities decide for themselves which of their strengths they want to tap into. For now, let's take the beautiful landscape that many of these places enjoy.
Gorham, New Hampshire is one of the communities with whom we partnered. It's located in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a really beautiful region, and yet the community was somewhat disconnected from some of its most tremendous assets, like its river and the nearby national forest. So Gorham, through our work with them, has been thinking about ways to enhance their river access, promoting new kayaking opportunities and new hiking trails. So they've really sought to become kind of a Four Seasons community that really draws visitors, but also can benefit residents and the local entrepreneurs and local outdoor enthusiasts as well. When you do have a fairly strong recreation economy, how do you ensure that you're still creating living wage jobs for residents, that you're creating affordable and attainable housing so that the people who work in that sector and those industries can afford to live in the community?
As Stephanie points out, welcoming new visitors is important, but improving the quality of life of locals should also be top of the agenda. Going back to Danny in Italy, although there wasn't a planning or steering committee, Musamelli's residents have also benefited from the €1 house project.
The locals know that this is a good thing, right? That by somebody buying a house, then the builders will be employed. They need to buy furniture, so the furniture shops will do well, like the supermarkets will do well. I met a very interesting Venezuelan woman. She lives in London and she studied to be a shoemaker. She's in finance in London, but she wants to be a shoemaker. And her plan is to buy a house here and then to start running shoemaking courses for teenagers in this town.
Danny's plan was to give back to the community too. That's why he created The Good Kitchen, a project set up to help those in need, families with financial hardships, children with fewer opportunities, the lonely and the elderly.
It's a poor town, I know that for a fact, and there are people in food poverty. So I did my homework, and there are a lot of people who are in food poverty here. However, the churches are looking after them. There are many elderly people in this town who their children have left for work. I think it's €250 a month they get for their pension, and they're paying a caregiver to come and look after them, to tidy the house, to shop for them, and then to cook for them as well. So I thought to myself, okay, if we can start using the surplus food to cook for those elderly people, then they're saving money, which is a good thing, right? And I've always worked on projects where food is a way of transforming lives. I've cooked for refugees in Calais. I've run supper clubs, fundraisers, big dinners, used surplus food. And always, food is the one thing that we all have in common.
Unfortunately, the pandemic put a stopper on Danny's €1 home dream. But improvising, he rented an old butcher's shop in the centre of town, and last summer, with the help of crowdfunding and support from the locals, he opened The Good Kitchen.
The only thing we need to do now is a little bit more pasta and then a spinach. And the spinach is going to be simple. The Good Kitchen is right here on the town square. It has beautiful big glass doors where people can see inside, and I can look out and people can see what's happening. We do kids cooking classes every second, third Saturday. Sunday we do a delivery to the elderly people and to the charities of the town. And then Friday nights is kind of like the youth group where people cook for each other.
Even though Danny's kitchen isn't exactly a public space, it acts as one for the town, somewhere open and accessible.
It's become more, it's not just a soup kitchen. It has become a social hub for the town. There's no green spaces in this town. There's no town halls. There's no community centres. There's no place for people to kind of congregate. And what's happened, happened very organically. What a beautiful thing that these young people who've got no jobs, no work, have somewhere safe to come. In summer, many of the locals, they have these campagnas, these small farms where they have a lot of produce. And so 75% of the produce that I cook with has been donated. And so that's a beautiful thing for the town because, they may not be able to give money, however they can give food, and that food is really valuable. Musamelli is definitely getting busier. I noticed that particularly in summer there are a lot more foreigners here to check out the houses, the €1 houses and the premium houses. The town is also applying for many EU grants. So this town square is going to be, they've got a massive grant to renovate the town square to make it car-free. The tennis courts are going to be renovated too. That's another EU grant, which is fantastic. They're looking at creating more green spaces in the town. So they're very forward-thinking.
While the €1 project seems to have created a momentum in Musamelli, for other towns across Italy, it hasn't been as much of a success. With complaints that houses are merely turned into holiday homes and retirement retreats, the revitalisation doesn't quite materialise. Instead, places like Piedmonte in northern Italy have ditched the project altogether in favour of financial incentives to help draw in working families. But in the right context, the €1 house project can work as a springboard for change. In inland Portugal, Martim is hoping that his orchestra can do the same.
Most of the times when we're playing, especially in little villages, we're playing to people who've never seen an orchestra. They don't know what a violin is, they don't know what a flute is, and they become sort of enchanted by it. And a lot of them have said that it's the most beautiful thing they've witnessed. We've had a lot of people in tears at the end of concerts. There was even once a blockade. They wouldn't let us out of the church where we performed because they said, we need you to play more. When are we ever going to have more of this? So it turns out it's really valuable for people to have an experience like this. It's valuable for the musicians. If you open doors through music, soon people will be curious about dance, about theater, about arts in general. And that's a great way to nourish one's life, I would say.
When the pandemic struck and the orchestra could no longer get together to play concerts, Martim had another idea. Why not create a platform to support other cultural projects in these small rural villages? His initiative is called Terra a Terra, which is Portuguese for land to land.
And I thought, well, why don't we endorse more people thinking like this? Because all of these musicians come from communities and they all know things that are not going too well within their communities. And maybe we can address those situations through music. But it can't be me because I'm not from there.
Terra Terra enlists experts to help entrepreneurs finance and jumpstart their own projects that in one way or another use music for social good.
It's amazing what people actually come up with, and only they could do it because they're part of those communities. So I think it really goes down to this level of realism where you need to connect. You don't want to be an outsider, you don't want to be a foreigner, you don't want to be imposing a cultural diet upon people. You really need to listen and understand and be generous.
As we've seen, there's no one-stop shop for rural revival. But what's Toposophy's take on all this? Climate change, food security, energy costs, and changes in the way we work. These are all issues that affect rural areas just as much as, if not more than, major cities. While we know that the world is becoming ever more urbanized, the countryside will remain everyone's breadbasket. So who lives in the countryside and how resilient communities are really matters. It's often tempting to romanticize life in rural villages, but the reality, as we heard in Sicily, can sometimes be quite different, with young people leaving and vital services withdrawn. Stemming this decline and putting communities back together again can be a very delicate process. The examples from Italy, Portugal, and the US have each shown, in different ways, that there are no quick fixes. This includes things like simply attracting more tourism, which can often be very seasonal. Instead, the approach, much like lessons we've already heard in earlier episodes, has to involve long-term planning, putting local residents' aspirations at the heart of the planning process, and pursuing projects that build resilience and give local people skills, confidence, and a reason to stay. These principles have been locked into all of Toposophy's projects in rural regions, whether it's Ayrshire and the Isle of Arran in Scotland, or the revival of the picturesque Vamvakou village in central Greece.
Obviously, music is never a priority. Obviously, roads and hospitals and schools must come first. But I'm a musician, so this kind of is my weapon if I'm to fight this battle. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a public policy maker, so this is the way I can contribute to society.
I do think this is one issue that really has been very salient in the US, and that's the, kind of rural versus urban divide, as is oftentimes talked of. The one thing that I would say is I think we would do well to get to know each other more, honestly. The heart of it, we have much more in common than we have that divides us.
You have to be willing to invest in this town, invest in this community, invest in the people, and then that's when you'll make a success of being here, whether it's a €1 house or a 20,000 euro house.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Common Ground by Toposophy. It was developed and produced by the Greek Podcast Project, with production assistance from Gaia Lutz, field reporting from Kane Bordeaux, and it was curated by the team at Toposophy. Next time on Common Ground,
I've realized how tourism really touches every single aspect of modern life. The reality is, if tourism really saw itself for the potential it has to be that motor of transformative action, it could actually reinvent itself in a way that there is a future for tourism.
we're looking at a new way of doing good through tourism. We hear from the team bringing safaris to Europe, the immersive travel company whose trips are serving communities from Costa Rica to India, and the scientist who's calling for a revolution in the way we travel. Yep, we're talking regenerative tourism. I'm Daphne Karnizis. Thanks for listening.